The day that the office was shut down because there was an American holiday is the day that things heavily escalated between Russia and Ukraine. Right at the start of the weekend, things began to heat up. There were reports of more Russian troops being brought to the region despite Russian claims that they were withdrawing. On top of that, there was shelling seemingly between Russian separatists in the Donbass region and the Ukrainian army. Then suddenly there were alleged bombs in Donetsk, one of the breakaway capitals. All of that led to further Russian rhetoric about protecting the people there before those breakaway governments began evacuating women, children, and the elderly. And during all of this, you had Ukrainian President Zelensky asking for a concrete timeline of when Ukraine could be admitted to NATO and asking for the West to impose sanctions on Russia. And that speedrun explanation brings us to Monday, where things really went off the rails. First off, Putin decided to officially recognize the Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic as independent states. Now that alone would have been bad enough, but to add insult to injury, he also guaranteed their security, meaning that any actions against them would be an action against Russia. Also, to quote, help these breakaway republics, Putin sent Russian troops into the regions, meaning that Russian troops have again invaded Ukraine. And I say again because it's important to remember that Russia already forcibly took Crimea in 2014, not to mention the fact that certain unmarked Russian troops have likely been in the Donbass region for a while. And a real quick thing, it's a side thing, but I do want to hit on because it's something important. A lot of outlets, even Western ones, followed Putin's lead in calling these invading troops peacekeepers. But calling them that, even in quotes, is widely seen as conceding some legitimacy to Putin's filled with lies narratives, while also possibly spreading the perception that Russian troops are some kind of neutral third party to keep the peace. They're not. They're there to infringe on Ukraine's sovereignty and at best help breakaway regions leave and at worst eventually annex them. And during his speech that recognized the independence of these territories, Putin, who once lamented the fall of the Soviet Union as the greatest geopolitical catastrophe in the last 100 years, also had some other rhetoric that shines light on how he sees the world, saying modern Ukraine was entirely and fully created by Russia, more specifically the Bolshevik communist Russia. This process began practically immediately after the 1917 revolution, and moreover, Lenin and his associates did it in the sloppiest way in relation to Russia by dividing, tearing from her pieces of her own historical territory, with him adding that Ukraine was, quote, ancestral Russian lands. So understand, he's trying to set up this narrative that Ukraine has always been a part of Russia until 1917, and simply put, that's not true at all. Ukrainians were acting in their own interests at that time, and while we obviously don't have time to get into all of that right now, if you do want more info on that, check out Mike Duncan's Revolutions podcast. He's currently covering the Russian Revolution, and he goes into detail about how Putin's version of events is way off base. You also had the US Embassy in Kyiv giving a more concise meme version of events of why Putin is wrong here. But either way, the entire situation has led to a confrontation at the UN, with the Russian ambassador to the UN justifying the invasion by claiming that it was to protect Russian-speaking people living in the region, while the Ukrainian ambassador demanded that Russia withdraw their recognition of the breakaway states. And following all of this, we had the expected reaction from the West: sanctions. Here in the US, President Joe Biden signed an executive order that target both the Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. It'll essentially stop Americans from working with the regions by blocking new investment, trade, and financing by US persons to, from, or in the regions. This also won't be the end of the road for sanctions, with Jen Psaki adding, to be clear, these measures are separate from and would be in addition to the swift and severe economic measures we have been preparing in coordination with allies and partners should Russia further invade Ukraine. And as I was recording today, Biden spoke and detailed new sanctions on Russia, indicating that it would block transactions with two major banks there, including the country's military bank, as well as placing restrictions on refinancing its national debt. And this could be a major problem for Russia, as it's not uncommon for nations to pull out new loans to pay their old ones, and Western banks are one of the largest contributors for this around the world. But the US wasn't alone here, right? This morning, we had British Prime Minister Boris Johnson announcing targeted sanctions against 5 Russian banks and 3 wealthy individuals following Monday's events. This on top of other sanctions already in place due to Russia assassinating dissidents living in the UK. However, many in the House of Commons on both sides made their displeasure at the sanctions known, though it's largely because they didn't go far enough. But you had Johnson defending them and saying, this is the first barrage of what we are prepared to do, and we hold further sanctions at readiness to be deployed alongside the United States and the European Union if the situation escalates still further. And the European Union as a whole is still working on its sanctions package, with leaders saying that Russia will feel the pain, but in the meantime, some members have moved to limit what they can, with Germany making the absolutely massive move of suspending the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, which would have been a major source of income for Russia when completed. But from here, the big question is, well, what happens next? Obviously, sanctions are on their way, but will things escalate? Is Ukraine essentially screwed and guaranteed to lose more territory to Russia? Because you have US officials pretty sure that Russian troops will eventually invade parts of Ukraine that are actually controlled by the Ukrainian military. And that is because Russia seemingly recognized the territorial claims made by the breakaway regions, and 70% of which are still controlled by Ukraine. And to that end, we have continued reports of shelling on Ukrainian positions, and possibly one of the longest lasting effects of all this may be the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Where Ukraine used to have them. In fact, it had more than Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, but they gave them up for assurances that it would remain independent. And so with all of this going down, the Ukrainian president lamented that decision, saying on Saturday, Ukraine has received security guarantees for abandoning the world's third nuclear capability. We don't have that weapon. We also have no security. And that last statement is something that many nations might feel after watching Russia eat up its neighbors, where you either need to be in a security alliance with nuclear deterrence, or you need to make your own to maintain your sovereignty. But as always, thank you for watching, subscribing, and Thanks to our fantastic sponsors like Coinbase and more specifically, Coinbase, DeFranco.com for making these extra videos possible. If you're looking to get into crypto or you just want like $42 for free, sign up now. It's a great service that I use, it's free, and you get $10 in Bitcoin just for signing up and $32 more in other crypto just for learning about them. You're welcome, and also thank you. Yeah, I love you faces, and I'll see you in the next video.